Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our online study of logistics management. Today we are going to talk about Module 7. It's transport systems. In this module, we have 4 topics. The first topic is about the importance of transportation to logistics. The second topic is about different transport modes. So we will identify different types of transport modes. The third topic is about cost structures. We will put emphasis on fixed cost and variable cost of different transport modes. The last topic is about the pricing strategies. So 4 different strategies will be introduced in this topic, in this module. So we have 4 topics. Before we discuss in transportation systems, maybe you can think about what transportation is. And you can watch this video and share your thoughts about transportation. Here, a formal definition of transportation can be presented here. We can have a look at this definition and identify some key points. So the first point is about the movement of cargoes by a carrier. So it means transportation will involve the selection of carriers. So you needed to identify the best carriers. The second point is between 2 points in a cost-effective manner. So it means you have to optimize transport networks to achieve the minimum cost. And the third point is about the times and conditions specified by the shipper. It means you needed to meet and satisfy your customers' requirements about times and conditions. So based on the definition of transportation, we can identify 2 different roles of transportation in logistics. The first is to provide movement services. This is a traditional function of transportation. And the second is to provide storage services. Storage services is the providing of storage services is temporary. It's temporary. It's different from traditional warehousing services. Also, it's more expensive than traditional warehousing. So, if we want to provide transportation services, we needed to select different types of transport modes. So in reality, there are 6 different types. Of course, the answer is obvious. It's very straightforward. In reality, there are road transport, rail transport, pipeline transport, inland waterway, and ocean or sea transport and air transport. So there are 6 different types of transport modes in practice. If we look at domestic shipments, we can identify the importance of different transport modes. So we look at this table, and we can focus the middle part of this table. That is mode shell, the mode shell. So we look at these numbers these numbers, we can identify truck transport. Truck transport had the highest percentage in each year. For example, the percentage was 68 in 2009, and it was 69.8% in 2015, and it will be 70.7% in 2021. So we can identify the most important transport mode. It is truck transport for domestic shipments, followed by rail transport and pipeline transport. So this is based on volume. If we look at this from a different perspective, if we look at this from revenue perspective, a similar result can be obtained from this table. So we look at the mode share. Numbers in this table are based on freight volumes and based on revenues. So we find truck transport had the highest percentages in all 3 years. So it means truck transport is the most popular transport mode in domestic transportation. Followed by rail transport and pipeline transport. So you can identify the importance or popularity of different transport modes. But for international shipments, sea transport or maritime transport is more popular, and it is the most commonly used transport mode for international shipments. Now we can look at the importance of transportation in logistics. We look at this fig. It shows the percentage of transportation in the total logistics costs. We look at the left fig. So we find the percentage was 63%. Also, we can identify 3 components of logistics costs. They are major components. So transportation, followed by inventory cost and warehousing cost. So transportation, inventory, warehousing costs are the 3 major components of logistics costs. It's similar for European logistics costs. Transportation had the highest percentage. It was 48%, followed by warehousing cost with 25%, and then the inventory cost with 16%. So the percentage of transportation in the total logistics cost can reveal the importance of transportation in logistics. So the major concern is how to reduce transportation cost when providing transportation services. And before we discuss this question, a further question is how to select the most suitable transport mode. So which transport mode should be used in practice? So you can compare the performance of different transport mode from different perspectives. Here we focus on operating characteristics from 5 perspectives, such as speed, availability, dependability, capability, and frequency. So you can compare the performance of different transport modes from these perspectives. Here we have an example. For example, we look at their performance from the speed perspective. So we find sea transport is the slowest. It is the slowest, and air transport is fastest. So you can compare the operating performance. It's similar if we look at their performance from transportation cost perspective. So we can identify sea transport as the least expensive. Air transport is the most expensive. So they have different performance, operating performance. When we understand how to evaluate their operating performance, we can rank different transport modes. So we look at this table. It's an example of evaluation of different transport modes from operating performance perspective. So we look at the first column. It shows different operating characteristics. So from speed, availability, blah, blah, blah. And the second column is rail transport, and then truck transport, water, pipeline, air transport. So if we evaluate their performance in terms of speed, we look at the first row. We find air transport performs best. So the score is 1. 1 means the best. In this example, it means the best. So air transport performs best because the speed is fastest. And truck transport is the second, so the score is 2. It's similar if we look at availability. So truck transport performs best in terms of availability. So 1 is assigned to truck transport. Let's move on to dependability. So pipeline performs best. So 1 is assigned to pipeline transport. So move on to capability. Water transport performs best. Move on to frequency. Pipeline performs best. Finally, we can get the composite score. So you get the sum of all the scores. For example, rail transport, you can get the sum of different scores. Finally, you get 14. For truck transport, it's 10. Water transport, it's 18. 17 for pipeline transport, 16 for air transport. And then you can compare the scores. You can compare the composite scores for different transport modes and identify the lowest transport mode. So we find truck got truck transport got 10. So it is the smallest number in this table, smallest number among the composite scores. So it means overall truck transport performs best. So truck transport will be selected. Okay, this is the selection of transport mode. Next, we can have a look at the cost structures. Cost structures, we will talk about fixed cost and variable cost. Fixed and variable costs are very fundamental cost definitions in economics. Fixed cost, it means the cost does not vary with the amount of services provided. So fixed cost is a constant, whatever the amount of services provided by the carriers. Variable cost will vary with the levels or the amount of services provided. So it means if you provide more services, variable cost will be higher. So if we look at the performance of different transport modes from the cost perspective, we find rail transport has higher fixed cost but low variable cost. Truck has low fixed cost, medium variable cost. It's similar. You can evaluate other transport modes, such as air transport. It is found that air transport has low fixed cost but high variable cost. So cost is a perspective to evaluate different transport modes. Okay, we have identified 6. We have identified 6 different types of transport modes. In practice, when 2 or more transport modes are used together, it is called intermodal transport. For example, piggyback transportation. It can combine road transport and rail transport together. So it is intermodal transport. By using a container or other equipment, it is very easy to transfer a container from the vehicle of one transport mode to the vehicle of another transport mode. So you don't have to transfer the contents, you just transfer the whole container. In so doing, the handling costs can be reduced. So it's very popular in practice. When providing transportation services, 2 principles should be noted. The first is economies of scale. The second is economy of distance. When you understand the cost structures, it's easy to understand economies of scale and economies of distance. It's very similar. So we have identified 2 components of the total cost. So fixed cost and variable cost. So when we look at economies of scale, it means when the size of the shipment is higher. When the size of the shipment is higher, means the unit transportation cost will be lower. So pay more attention to the unit transportation cost rather than the total cost. It can explained from the fixed cost perspective. So fixed cost can be allocated over a large weight of shipment. So you will find the unit transportation cost will be reduced. It's similar for economies of distance. So the longer distance will reduce unit transportation cost because fixed cost will be allocated over a longer distance. Okay, two principles, but the goal is to maximize the size, but at the same time, you need to meet customers' expectations. So you need to get the balance between cost and customer service. So when providing transportation services, there are different participants. First, we look at the demand side. There are shippers. Shippers have the demand for moving goods from one place to another. The supply side, there are carriers. Carriers aim to maximize their revenue and minimize their costs. The transactions between shippers and carriers will be assisted by a middleman. The middleman is agents. They are brokers or freight forwarders. So they will assist transactions between shippers and carriers. Okay, next, government. Government is another participant in transportation when providing transportation services. The government makes transportation policies and regulations. So the aim is to provide a stable and efficient environment to support economic growth. Another participant is the public. The public are interested in transportation accessibility, expenses, and standards for security, safety, and the environment. So different participants have different concerns when involved in transportation activities. As the development of internet, the communications between different participants have been greatly improved. For example, the web-based enterprises can provide information marketplaces. For example, for freight matching or purchasing fuel, equipment, parts, and supplies. So the role of the internet in transportation is increasing, and this as well as technology will be discussed in Module 11. Next, if we look at transportation regulations, Transportation regulations can be divided into economic regulations and social regulations. So the purpose of economic regulation is to make transportation equally accessible. But the purpose of social regulation is to protect public safety and environment. So the purpose are different. So sometimes economic regulations might affect social regulations or affect the safety issue. So sometimes there are conflicts between the two different regulations. Next is about the selection of transport mode and carriers. This is an important decision for each company. Very important. We can follow a two-step process. The first step is to select the suitable transport mode. The second step is to select best carriers. First step is based on the operating characteristics. We can discuss this. For example, you can evaluate the performance from speed perspective, the availability, dependability, capability, and frequency perspectives. So you can identify the most suitable mode for your company. The second step is to select the best carrier. Similar to purchasing process. So you can follow different steps. In practice, there is no standard list of selection criteria. Each company has different criteria, but some common factors can be found in this table. So you can refer to these factors and revise them. You can add more criteria based on your firm's situations. So this is a list of common factors. We can look at this example, and you will know how to identify the best carrier. We look at this table. the first column shows the attribute or operating or the characteristics. So here it is a list of characteristics and some factors like service performance improvement, cost savings, driver performance, So this is a list of characteristics, and the second column shows importance. So importance in this table means weight. So you can assign different weights to different factors. For example, the first factor, service performance improvement, has the highest percentage, highest weight. So it means for this company, this fact is the most important. So it has the highest weight. Okay. The third column shows growth score. It's between 0 and 5. So you can give a score to each criteria to evaluate a carrier's performance. For example, if we look at driver performance, so for this particular carrier, it got 5. The score was 5. So it means this carrier did very well in terms of driver performance. So the last column shows net weighted score. So use growth score times importance, so you will get the weighted score. Final step is to calculate the performance score. The performance score is 81%. You can use the sum of net weighted score divided by 5. So you get the performance score. This is for a particular carrier. For each carrier, you can get the score. So finally, you compare all these scores to identify the carrier with highest score. So the carrier with the highest score will be the best carrier. Another topic in this module is transport pricing. So we identify 7 factors. They are distance, weight, density, stowability, handling, liability, and market. So you need to understand the relationship between each factor and transportation cost. Now we look at the first factor, its distance. So we have discussed economies of distance. So you can understand the relationship between distance and transportation cost. It means when the distance is longer, the unit transportation cost will be lower. But the total transportation cost will be higher. The second factor is weight. We have discussed economies of scale. So it's similar. So means if the shipment is larger, the unit transportation cost will be lower, but the total transportation cost will be higher. So we look at this fig. So when weight increases, we find the cost per pound means the unit transportation cost will be reduced. The third factor is density. So we look at this fig. It shows the relationship between product density and unit transportation cost. So when the density is higher, unit transportation cost will be lower. Next is stowability. It means the how product dimensions fit into transportation equipment. So in practice, the rectangular shapes are easier to store. But if old package shape and size are used, the transportation cost might be higher. Next, the use of special equipment can increase transportation cost. Next, the liability can increase transportation cost. So carriers must pay for liability insurance or accept financial responsibilities. But shippers can reduce the risk by improving packaging and loading and reducing susceptibility to loss or damage. The next factor is market factors. For example, lane, volume, and balance can affect transportation cost. So it means if there is no backhaul load, the vehicle will return empty. So the transportation cost will be higher. And imbalances in volume will increase transportation cost. So you need to understand the impact of each factor on transportation cost. Next, we can talk about pricing strategies. So there are 4 different strategies. We can highlight some key points. The first strategy is cost of service. It's based on, it's from the carrier perspective. So first, the carrier can estimate the cost of providing service and then use a percentage to indicate the profit margin. This strategy is more suitable for low-value goods or in highly competitive situations. The second strategy is value of service. It's different from cost of service. Value of service is from a shipper's perspective. So it is based on the value perceived by the ship. This strategy is more suitable for high-value goods or when there is no competition in the market. The third strategy is the combination of cost of service and value of service. It means you can set the cost of service price as the minimum cost and value of service price as the maximum cost. And in practice, the cost will be a value between the minimum and the maximum cost. So this combination strategy is more popular in practice. It's more suitable for volatile markets and changing competitive situations. The next strategy is net rate strategy. It is tailored to individual customers' needs. So all the discounts and accessorial charges are rolled into one all-inclusive price. We have an example here to show how to select transportation mode. Here we at the beginning of this example, there are some basic information. For example, shipped from plant inventory to warehouse inventory. So it means there will be plant inventory cost and warehouse inventory cost. Next, the expected volume is So this is the demand. Next, the product is worth 25. So this is the cost of the purchasing cost. Next, the plant and carrying costs are 30%. Next, we have a look at this table. It shows different transport modes. There are rail transport, truck, and air transport. So the unit transportation cost is showing in the second column, and transit time in the third column, and shipment size in the last column. So some information about different transport modes. So the question is to calculate the total cost of each transport mode. Before calculating the total cost, we have to identify cost types. So in this example, there are transportation cost, in-transit inventory cost, plant inventory cost, warehousing inventory cost. So there are 4 different types. First, we look at transportation cost. Transportation cost is easy to understand. So the total transportation cost equals unit transportation cost times demand. In-transit inventory cost. We need to calculate the I is the carrying cost per year. So it is 30%. And C is the purchasing price. D is demand. T is transit time. So within 1 year, there are 365 days. So we can calculate in-transit inventory cost. Next, plant inventory cost. The key point is to find the average inventory level. So Q we find Q is the, okay, what is Q? Q is the shipment size for different transport modes. So the average inventory equals the shipment size divided by 2, get the average inventory. It's a plant inventory cost. Warehousing inventory cost, we have to consider transportation cost. Also, we needed to calculate the average inventory level. So it's similar to plant inventory cost to identify the average inventory level. So finally, you can get the total cost, and compare these costs. We identify truck transport as the best transportation mode. Next, with the help of technology, so by using technology, you can trace and track your products. Also, technology can help with vehicle route scheduling. So, technology will be discussed in Module 11. We will provide more details. Next, we look at documentation. Documentation serves practical function. It shows what, where, and how much is being transported. Provides a legal resource. When providing transportation services, key documents are a bill of lading, invoice, freight claim. We look at bill of lading. We can look at some key points. First, it is issued by carrier, and it's the contract between a ship and carrier. Also, it can be used as a proof of receipt and a document of title, evidence for a contract of carriage. Here we have a sample bill of lading. So it includes information about the shipper, from some information about the shipper, and the shipper 2 shows information about the receiver, and also we can see information about customer order and the carrier information. Okay, so this is bill of lading. So this is module 7. If you have any questions, we can discuss in the tutorial session. Okay. Stay inside and keep safe. Bye bye.